Today's one-on-one is a special to mark World Autism Day. Our guest today is Daisy Esohe Jonathan, a behavioral analyst, a certified cognitive specialist, an advanced certified autism and inclusion specialist, and a mother of a child on the spectrum. She is the founder of Pleasant Places, Lagos and Port Harcourt. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Daisy Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's start by today is Autism Awareness Day, and as we know, and the month is Autism Awareness Month, but today we want to zoom in on the important aspects of autism. So tell us about your journey as far as autism is concerned.
My journey started first as a mom. After I had my second son, and I noticed that there were some regressions in certain areas. He had started off with speech like every normal other toddler, and his development was quite typical until a point when I observed that he seemed to have regressed. And like any mom will do, I started to search for answers. You know, I started to question what was going on. And for the first time, the word autism, popped up because I had to go. For the first time, yes, it popped up. And my first reaction was to deny it, to say, oh no, it can't possibly be, it can't be my son, and all of that. But as he grew older, he turned 3. I had to, go around to search for answers, to ask around, to ask people what was going on with him. We went to the hospitals. We saw a few people who said they were professionals at that time, just trying to get a diagnosis. And I was concerned with, he had impairments in 4 major areas. The social skills had all gone. His speech and communication was, very, very delayed. He couldn't use words. We had some repetitive behaviors. We had some stereotypical behaviors. He would walk around on tiptoes. He would cover his ears. He would scream. So we had sleepless nights. So he had sleep issues at the point.
Let's set this in context for people who may not appreciate what you were going through in terms of finding answers. How long ago was this?
About 10 years ago.
And at that time?
8 years. Yeah, he's 10 years now.
Okay, so it's about 10 years ago. So what's your opinion of what help was available at that time?
At that time, there was absolutely no help. Okay. The few information I could get at that time were things I could glean from the internet. Even at that time, we didn't have as much information out there as we have now. And I knew no other parents, on the surface of the earth who had a child with that same, kind of challenge that my son had. So there was no information. The schools didn't know. The hospitals didn't know either. I remember, visiting a neurologist at that time, and he said, "Oh no, madam, don't worry. This child is fine. He's okay. You're just comparing him with, your older son because he's my second." So there was absolutely almost nothing.
So try and help us understand what it felt like to be in your position at that time. Did you have family support, even if you didn't have professional support?
I couldn't even tell my family what was going on because I couldn't even understand what was going on. I remember, talking with my husband and saying, there's something wrong. And my husband was quite sure there was nothing wrong. Okay. So I had that, was it a fight within me? Was I imagining things? Am I expecting too much from, my son? So I had all of that tussle, going on until the word popped up, and, I had to discuss it with the doctor that this is what I've seen on the internet, this is what I think, is going on. He didn't agree with me at that time, but after a while, I got the diagnosis in quotes, but then I was left alone to, forge ahead by myself.
Okay, so what were the symptoms? You say there are 4 major areas your child was struggling with. Specify them for us. Okay,
for a diagnosis of autism to be made in any child, he must have impairments in 4 major areas. And my son, qualified on all of those, what we call the quads of autism. So there must be social impairments, that's to say the child may not be able to, meet eye contact or make eye contact. The child may not be able to interact or initiate, conversations or, social interaction. He may not reciprocate when other children come to him. He may want to hide. At that time, it was funny. My son would even go hide in a wardrobe, almost like shutting himself away from the world, okay. Which was quite absurd, And then he would want to talk with his shadow. He was quite, almost obsessed with his own shadows, and that was all, he seemed to want to do. And he also had the repetitive behaviors, lining up objects, which we see a lot in children with autism, on the autism spectrum. He would line up objects at a time, he would spin around in circles, he would want to tiptoe, there was a little bit of rocking, a little bit of spinning. We had what is called pica at the time, when he would want to dig up the walls and chew, chew things that are not edible. And then he was extremely picky with food, so he wanted to eat a particular meal at a particular temperature, with a particular plate.
So
and,
like you say, there's a spectrum, so these are some of the ones you experience, but clearly there are others that
what we say now is, if you see one child with autism, you've seen just one child with autism. They all would I say manifest, would have symptoms across different areas.
But the communication, social interaction tends to be
a challenge.
Okay, so let's fast forward, because we know you're not where you were when you got the news. What was your response? How did you rise to that challenge?
Now, here I was a young mother at that time, with no support, but with the only thing I was armed with was this incredible love for my son. And you could see almost like a veil opening, and then you would see the child who is so smart, and then you want to do something about whatever it is I was covering up. So I started to do researches, a lot of researches. I started to do courses online, to train myself to equip him.
Wow.
At the time, I had to take him off school, and I homeschooled him. And that was the first time I discovered that he could read, though he wasn't really able to talk. So he could learn. It was surprising that he was actually able to learn, contrary to what the schools had told me at that time. So we went through all of that. I met with professionals outside of the country. I had to travel at a point to get training. It was all
self-funded.
So it is all self-funded, and it was just driven by, a mother's love.
Okay, and that led you to, because, we know now that you've set up a couple of institutions and you're very active as far as being an advocate for autism. Take us to the point where you started to intervene a lot more aggressively. Yeah,
I think the breaking points for me was when I took my son to a school, and at the school, I shared with them the challenges they had at that time, and they said, yes, madam, you could bring him in, but you have to pay a little bit extra for us to take care of him. So I paid 50% extra on all fees, which was heartbreaking for me, but I had to do it, to get him with his peers. And I had made that payment on a Monday, and then I was called up on a Thursday to tell me to pick up my son. He was 3 at the time, and I was told to pick him up, that he had attempted to bite a teacher.
Okay.
Which at the point, I knew that the school wasn't equipped for him, so I had to take him off the school. I was devastated, and that started the search, moving from a school to the other one to find the one that was perfect for him. So I didn't want an environment that would tolerate him. I wanted an environment that would include him, that would work with me, to work on the weaknesses and then his areas of strengths. And I went around, and I was very, very disappointed. Okay. I think at that point was when I said, why don't I start off, something? And that's where Pleasant Places was born, first as a school, and as an inclusive school, which is, we had children with needs and children who didn't have needs. And I saw that they were able to, work together. The children without needs were able to impact on those with needs. The children with needs too were able to impact on those without needs, because they became more tolerant, more empathetic, more involved in, working with their peers to help them. And after a while, I started having parents bring in the children, a whole lot of, and then of course, like we have said, there are an entire spectrum of, disorders. So when they come in with the children, we had a few of them who weren't quite ready for school. And then we had a few of them who were older than the school system. So if I'm saying a 15-year-old, for example, and at the time all I had was, a preschool, or, the early primary years. So when they come with children at that point, perhaps a child who is nonverbal, a child who hasn't even, gotten through the rudiments, of literacy and all of that. So I had quite a lot of those coming in. And of course, parents would go tell other parents that, oh, take your child to Pleasant Places, do this. So I had to set up a therapy center, which focused more on building the children's skills and preparing them for adulthood. So we're working more with Pleasant Places, the therapy center, which is located in Port Harcourt now. works more with children who are, getting into adulthood, and we're preparing them for a functional life, for an independent life, a life where mom and dad are no longer there, and they have to, be able to sustain themselves in as much as they can.
Oh, it sounds like a very involved activity you got yourself into. How did that impact your own personal life in terms of, your relationship with your husband, your relationship with your other children who went on the spectrum? What did it demand of you?
Personally, I saw a Daisy. I began to see a Daisy that I didn't know existed. I saw a stronger me. So the days of the tears and the crying and the waking up at night, which I still do once in a while, I had to put aside, because now I had other children that I was responsible for. And, as the schools, the institutions grew, I also had to set up a support group. We had the Warrior Mom support group. And so I have this community of mothers who would come talk to you about, the stress, the love, the joys of bringing up children with needs. So I had to be strong for my son first. Then I had to be strong for myself. But now I have to be strong for others, So there's not a time I can, the periods I want to sit down and cry, I just know that those tears have to dry up fast, because there's so many children out there waiting for Mrs. Jonathan to write their programs, Mrs. Jonathan to write their plans, Mrs. Jonathan to give them a smile and a hug, and and all of that. So yes, it did change. You? Yeah, it changed me. It changed my perception of what really matters, what matters most in life. So instead of the vacations, I was sharing with someone that the past few years, all my vacations have been training vacations. So I don't travel because I want to go see Disneyland anymore. I'm traveling because I want to go learn this new skill.
But did you find yourself, because even the average mom without that challenge feels torn into several different dimensions. What about your family life? I still want to know how you've managed to keep both. I'm
blessed with a wonderful husband. I'll say this everywhere. Okay. So my husband, I call him the cold water to my, my hotness. So he had the perfect knack, to pour, calmness into every, turbulent situation. So he was, and that's one of the things we tell, the male figures, you have to be there for your wife. You have to be there. It's not something one partner has to handle alone.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have heard that some couples, when they have this challenge, one partner finds it difficult and one partner is doing all the heavy lifting, and it tends to put a stress on the marriage. Have you found that?
Yes, a lot of marriages are strained. A lot of I've had to counsel women, that their husbands have left I recently heard a story yesterday of a man who would pay fees for 3 other children and not pay for the one with needs, because he says that can't possibly be his child. Okay. So we've had, marital issues that we've had to step in, sometimes successfully, other times the marriage breaks up just because there's a child, with needs. Yes, it has the tendency to bring a crack. It has, I wouldn't say it's what brings a crack. I won't believe that most of those marriages were not even, closing needs together in the first place. And then, having a child with needs just, kind of is the last straw, that breaks the camel's back. So yes, we do have that. We also have it on the other way. I've also seen a mom who left her child with needs with the husband, and then she left and she got into another marriage. She couldn't cope. Yeah, she couldn't cope.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the Nigerian sphere, because now we know Pleasant Places is in Port Harcourt, and we have Pleasant Places in Lekki here in Libya. In terms of the development, 10 years ago you said there was no support. What changes have you seen over the years, and what changes have you been a part of? Yeah, over the years there's increased awareness. So every year, I'm on the media, and there's so many other mothers who are doing wonderful things all over Nigeria, all over the world, all over Africa. So information has increased, yes. Awareness, I want to say, has increased a lot. Okay. So almost everyone has heard about autism. Now, I'm only concerned a little bit about, yes, we know, but have we really accepted that the children are different? I was going to say the cultural stigma. Exactly. So information, yes, has increased, awareness has increased, but along with that, we also have the wrong information increasing. So we have misconceptions increasing. Okay. So people talk about autism like it becomes the brunt of a joke. Like, okay, are you autistic? What's wrong with you? Are you autistic? Okay. So we get that part of it, which is not so nice. Yeah. And then we also get some level of wrong diagnosis. So I see children come to my practice, and then the
parents say, oh, the doctor said, or I wouldn't use the word doctor now, someone said this child is on the autism spectrum. And then you look at this child professionally and the child doesn't even meet the criteria. So you have a lot of, children being overdiagnosed, and then you also have the underdiagnosed ones, because everybody seems to be an expert suddenly. We also have increased number of professionals, pseudo-professionals, I would say, because training, the information is increasing, training is not really there yet. So we have knowledge, but there's no skills. So parents know that this is autism, but they don't have skills to handle their children. The professionals know that this is autism, but they don't have the skills to handle the children. The teachers know, oh, there's something called autism, but they automatically feel that every child who is on autism spectrum, cannot learn or has to learn a certain way. So the misconceptions, everyone seems to want to put every child that they meet with the need or with the communication delay or with the social skills impairments in a box and say, okay, this is autism. And that's where I get very, very worried.
Challenged. Yeah, speaking of misconceptions, you would say the elephant in the room of the major taboo would be religion. So I want us to delve into that a bit, this whole not my portion syndrome, but we'll do that after the break. We've come up to the time to take a brief break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at the whole area of religion and other aspects concerning autism awareness. This is One on One on Plus TV Africa. Okay, we're still on One on Plus TV Africa, and we're still with Daisy Jonathan, Mrs. Daisy Jonathan, founder of Pleasant Places. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you so much, Ekene.
Yeah, good to have you. So we're still talking about awareness and misconceptions. And before we went on the break, we brought up the issue of religion, the it's not my portion syndrome. Please tell us about that.
Nigerians are extremely religious people. And a lot of our thought processes is built around what we hear, from our religious sectors or leaders or organizations. We've had the not my portion thing. I went through that. It's some level of denial, I remember when I first told my husband about autism, and he said, no, I pay my tithes, I pay my tithes, I sow seeds, I can't possibly have a child with autism, but it's nobody's portion. It's nobody's. So when we have discussions with religious leaders, I've had, the privilege of having trainings for some religious groups, and what we say
both Christian, Muslim.
Yes, exactly. I haven't done so much, and I would love to explore working with, the Islamic organizations. So far, I have a lot of Islamic moms, and we talk, and I know they do some work, but I haven't had that privilege yet. But what we say is, if we believe that, God has a perfect plan, so every good and perfect gift comes from God. So if we have that belief, then we have to also understand that God actually has a reason for allowing your child to be diagnosed with autism, and that's the way I want to look at it. We also have the blame game that goes on, so it has to be the enemies, it has to be the wicked mother-in-law who never wanted me to marry her son, it has to be that wicked neighbor, so we have parents come to us, mothers coming to say, oh, I know how this happened, I had this dream when I was pregnant. Yes, we do believe, on the spiritual side, yes, we do believe that, but the question is, are we going to focus on how, how it came to be, or we focus on helping this child, I always will talk to them about the blind man at the gates called Beautiful, and say, so who committed the sin, the father or the mother? No, it's just so that the name of the Lord will be glorified. And that's the way I see this. I feel my son came in just so that I will be jolted, I will be pushed to what my mission is. Actually, my vision is, my vision will be built from that, knowing now that this is my purpose, basically. And I encourage parents to look at it that way. But we do have a lot of negative statements, coming on from, the religious centers. We have the stares. A lot of our parents do not go to church or to the mosque because they don't want to be stared at. Our children don't do so well in the typical Nigerian church that is noisy, because a lot of them, try to avoid sensory stimulus, especially in terms of the auditory stimulus coming in from our churches are incredibly noisy. So you see them cover their ears, you see them scream in the churches, and that's because you know, they're uncomfortable,
Yes.
but that's immediately seen as the sign of demons.
Okay.
You know, and then I remember a couple of years ago when a mother came in with a boy, about 10 years, who had all sorts of marks all over, you know, his body. And she said someone had told her to take him to a bush, you know, to put the incision on the body, and, you know, they tried to flog out the demons, you know, that was in the child, and that's child abuse.
So the child was had a diagnosis of autism?
She didn't even seek for a diagnosis. She was busy, and that's what we tell parents, instead of focusing on, why don't you know exactly what is going on with the child? You know, so she had all of the prayers going on, and, you know, the burning of the candles and the incenses, and then there was no focus on helping the child, you know, to work on the weaknesses, to work on the challenges, you know, and then to seek therapy, seek help. You know, nothing was done until the child was about 10 years.
Okay. Well, speaking of your mission, you said this, you know, this experience jilted you into your mission. Let's explore some of the things you've been able to explore, really, within the context of the establishments that you run.
Okay, so with Pleasant Places, I have, you know, every year I tell my staff that I don't know where we're going next. You know, it has to be, okay, so where else do we see a need? So we have moved from the school, we do have the school. Yes, we've moved from the therapy center. We have the therapy center where the children's skills are built, and, you know, we work directly with the children. Now we're looking at the level of, at the angle of training. So we have the training center where we want to, you know, equip teachers with the skills that they need. We want to train parents, we want to train caregivers. We have a training coming up in the next week or thereabouts for drivers, for nannies,
support
workers, you know, who interact with these children. So like I said, the information is increasing, but there are no skills.
Okay.
So before we scream at that nanny for not doing the right thing by your child, we need to provide her with the right skills to be able to work with the child. Before we talk to the religious, you know, organizations, on Sunday I was talking to, you know, members of my church, and I say, see, you have to give me a room. We need to have an inclusive class, you know, for these children with needs, because they also have to be part.
This is in the Sunday school.
Yeah, so we're pushing for inclusion everywhere. So inclusion has to be done in the schools. Inclusion has to be done in, you know, in the religious organizations. They have to understand that these children are there, that parents are members of your congregation, they're your worshipers, and we need to make provision for them. You know, so we're looking at training for religious leaders, for, you know, support workers, for parents. You know, a mother can easily get overwhelmed and clueless, not knowing what to do. We need to equip them. So now we're looking at the training angle. We also have the Childcare Foundation, where we try as much as is possible. I think we have about 8 to 10 children who receive free therapy from us based on, you know, activities of the foundation, because it's incredibly expensive to provide care. We haven't even looked
at that side of things.
To provide care, support, education, therapies, and all whatnot for a child with an autism diagnosis. And then you have people who have no income at all.
Yes, I imagine in Nigeria that might be the challenge of more than 50%.
On the average, therapy is about perhaps 10,000 naira. You know, 10,000 naira a week at the minimum.
Yes.
That's the minimum.
Okay.
Most organizations would charge about between 90 to 200,000 naira a month. And then you have people who are from families that can barely eat, and then they have these children. You know, that's not their priority.
Maybe help us with statistics, because people may be trying to grapple with how significant the problem is. Well, what is your understanding? I mean, what do you know about the problem, the statistics?
According to Autism Speaks, 2018, we have autism occurring in 1 in 37 boys, and then 1 in about 151 girls. But that statistic is for the US. We do not have statistics here because there's no database. You know, there's nothing, you know, to really say this is how many children. Now, diagnosis is even a challenge. Getting your child diagnosed is a challenge, because you still have the medical, you know, personnel saying, you know, oh, we'll check the ears, maybe, maybe not. So everyone just assumes that this is autism. We don't really know. You know, the right tools are not being used, and they're actually everywhere, very easy to get. So we don't have the right tools to diagnose.
So who would you say this is a job for? Is this a job for the government to standardize the process of diagnosis and in terms of gathering data?
It's the job of the government, I would say, you know, to be able to put together a team of professionals, because it's not, autism is not a medical challenge, for example. So having and saying a doctor should diagnose, it's going to be very difficult. Yes, they could say, yes, this is what it is, and doctors do diagnose.
Sorry, when you say it's not a medical challenge, what challenge is it? Put it in the category
we say it's a developmental challenge. So there's no tests. It's not like malaria, for example, where you go do a test and it shows that, okay, this person has malaria. There's no tests to see if this person has autism. What we have, parameters, to tick off on. And now depends on the parents being able to describe properly what she's experiencing with the child.
So what would you like the government to do in terms of when we're now advocating? This is Autism Awareness Day. I want you to speak to the government. I want you to speak to, this is your chance to speak to the government, speak to the community leaders, and also to the support workers or the parents.
There has to be a multifaceted approach, to autism. Basically, we need support from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Child and Social Welfare. They all have to come together to form up a team.
Okay.
That would help look at autism at different levels, from the level of diagnosis to the level of support to the level of, it's sad that we don't have a social support system, so it's a bit difficult to say all of this. But for the level of, all of that, and then we can be able to know exactly, if we don't know how many they are, it's difficult to provide or to program, for these children. So we need to have at least a database. I don't know where that's going to be now, but if there's a working group made up of different professionals, and we're beginning to have quite a number of professionals, who are there, instead of playing just lip service, instead of just being out there, making noise about autism and, talking on the radio, can we come together to bring together a working document.
Okay. And then to the community leaders?
Yeah. And then to the community leaders, we just need to work on reducing stigma.
Okay.
The mothers, the parents are incredibly stigmatized, and the more there's stigma, the more they hide the children at home.
So inclusiveness.
Yes.
We should work on bringing them into
the less
regular
basic services.
social activities. Okay.
Yes.
And then to the parents. Being a parent yourself.
Be strong. That's what I would say. Parents, be strong. Don't give up on that child. Don't. We've had a lot of children that move from being non-verbal to children who are speaking. We have children who are getting into higher institutions. Everywhere in the world, we have children who are breaking bounds and boundaries every day. Don't give up on that child. I say what the child you see now is evolving to become somebody. And I keep saying these children are like gifts that are wrapped up, in a package. Your job as a parent is to unwrap that delicate gift, just, one layer at a time, painstakingly. It's difficult, but it can be done.
It's worth it, yes. Well, that's all we have time for on One-on-One. It's been a pleasure having you, Mrs. Daisy Jonathan, founder of Pleasant Places Port Harcourt and Lagos. That's it on One-on-One now. You're watching Plus TV Africa.
Thank you so much.